The things that ought to scare me don't always scare me. Physically, I can prove that to you. You don't get this handsome look without doing some rearranging. I've had about 75 or 80 stitches on my face from about 6, 7 different occasions. The things that should have scared me didn't scare me. For example, the first 5 or 6 I had between my eyes are because a first grader thought he could be the catcher in a 6th grader's baseball game. I've got 15 here, one of the sides, I don't know which side. I got 15 here because a junior high boy in football thought he could make a tackle even if his helmet had come off. I have 19 over the other eyebrow because a certain Ozark Christian College freshman on this very property, well, never you mind, it's none of your business how that one happened. Let's just say it seemed like a good idea at the time. I got a scar here. I got a scar here because a young boy thought a wounded red-tailed hawk would make a wonderful pet. The red-tailed hawk had second thoughts. But there's scars I can't show you because they're deeper. They're deeper in my heart and my mind and my soul. You see, the sin that should have scared me didn't. And in that convoluted moment or in that convoluted season or that convoluted chapter, hiding behind the chainsaw seemed to make some kind of sense to me. And the things that should have scared me didn't. In Colossians 3:16, we have a collective responsibility, a divine mandate, this imperative that we are given. It is a collective one. No one gets to sit back and say, today is not for me. That's not true. You need to sit forward in the front of your seat in a sense and go, this is what the Word of God says. You have a mandate. This mandate is built around this word, admonish. Colossians 3:16, here's that collective responsibility. Let the message of Christ or let the word of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another. Admonish is a rather unique word. It's really only needed in dangerous places. You'll never need the word in heaven. When you walk in heaven's gates, throw the word admonish away. You'll never have to have it. There'll be many things you discard at heaven's gates. But admonish is a word you need in a broken world. It's a word that you use when you look out for one another. It's a word that you use when you have one another's back. At its very core, admonish is not complex. It means to warn or caution or to point out danger. It means to verbally protect someone. And to be honest, that word scares us to death. You know, giving someone permission to verbally admonish us or those around us sounds like giving a baseball bat to a 4-year-old inside a house. That seems like a really bad idea. We say that's just what we need. Let's deputize all the judgmental Christians and let's ask them to point out our sin. And more than that, let's deputize all those judgmental Christians and let's ask them to point out where our potential sin could be. Oh, I like where this goes. I like where this goes. No, it sounds like if we honestly said, look, our job is to admonish one another. It sounds like we're making more verbal Pharisees, more Westboro Christians. I know, let's passionately empower all the Michael Scotts and Dwight Schrutes of the world and say, invite them, come intervene in my life. Run to the hills. Run, children, run. Who wants that? Nobody does. No, the idea of greater judgmentalism, and I'm saying a truth here, the idea of greater judgmentalism scares us more than having error in our own life. So we downplay admonish. Oh, it's there and we read over it, but quite frankly, most of us kind of beep right past that. You haven't heard a sermon on admonish in quite a while, I'm pretty sure. Because the very idea of admonish feels too dangerous. So we downplay admonish. We feel safer hiding among the chainsaws. Let's let this admonish thing lie quietly, undisturbed. I don't know if I'm giving a confession about my own life or yours, but I probably do begin with this premise that my own sin doesn't scare me as much as other things scare me. but I'm not sure that's what Jesus would say. This morning, in a short time to try to put this little package in here, I want to remind you that there's an astounding difference. There's a Grand Canyon difference between how Jesus speaks of sin when he speaks of it as a noun and when he speaks of it as a verb. Now, my language will be a little sloppy here, but stay with me. It's an astounding difference. When Jesus speaks of sin as a noun, for example, when Jesus speaks of a sinner, man, those are endearing passages, and you can't help but pull those passages to you. When Jesus uses a noun sense of sinner, it's incredibly good. When Jesus uses the verb sense of sinning or to sin, that kind of an idea, you need to know, wow, we got a different Jesus who stands there and speaks of that. Here's how you might point it out. For example, there's incredible grace and kindness whenever the noun sinner is used. Jesus will say, these are the people I want to eat with, sinners. These are the people I want to be my friend, sinners. Jesus will say, when you ask, why'd you come? Well, he kind of must wink when he said this. There must have been a twinkle in his eye. But he said, I didn't come for the healthy people. I came for the sinners. That's who I came for. Christ is a shepherd of the flock of sinners. It's a sweet word. A woman comes to him, and you know these passages. A woman comes to Jesus, and everybody points out that she's a sinner. It's very clear she's a sinner. And you watch how Jesus treats this sinner. Man, I want to be a sinner. Because how Jesus treats her is incredible. The kinds of things he says to her, he says that things like she loves much, and he speaks of forgiveness, and he speaks of her faith, and he tells her to go in peace. There's great rejoicing, Jesus said, in heaven over a sinner, the noun, as it finishes the rest of the sentence. It's a powerful story Jesus tells about two men who went to pray, and one of them's a sinner, noun, and the sinner goes home justified. No, they're very good when Jesus speaks almost tender. In fact, I would say one of the safest places in the world to be is a sinner in the arms of Christ. But let's go to the other side of that massive Grand Canyon. Let's cross over to the verb side. And the verb side's scarier. The verb side's a lot scarier. Some of the wildest, most mind-blowing things Jesus will say will have to do with this concept of sinning, this concept of to sin. Now, for example, he will say things like, to be sinning, he will say in Matthew 23, is like a rotting corpse inside a tomb. I went bike riding Saturday afternoon, and I must have, as I was winding around back behind Atlas, I must have gone through the valley of death. There was a dead armadillo, there was a dead raccoon. Apparently they were having a contest and neither one won, getting across the road. There was a dead deer there. There were carcasses around. And can I tell you the stench of death? When I bike, I sound like a tornado is coming. People have been known to pull the tornado siren because it sounds like a freight train coming, you know, the way I breathe. But man, I was so sick almost I wanted to throw up because the stench was overwhelming. And Jesus points to that kind of a tomb and he says, that's what it's like to be sinning. When I go to passages, Jesus says things like, if your right eye causes you to sin, rip it out and throw it away. Verb, if it causes you to sin, that kind of an idea. We go, wait. Jesus is using hyperbole here. And hyperbole doesn't mean always what it means. Hyperbole is an old communicator's trick. Hyperbole means you can ignore what I'm just saying because I'm being entertaining right now. Except, wow, Jesus seems like he's pretty serious making a point about sinning. He doesn't seem to be the entertainment mode. He doesn't seem to sort of wink and go, hey, how do you like my wordplay? He doesn't seem to wink or nod or grin or say, ha ha, gotcha. Jesus said it is better to rip out your right eye and throw it away than to be sinning and go where sinning takes you. He seems to be saying, Randy, you may grossly underestimate your own sin. Jesus will go on to say, if your right hand causes you to sin, hack it off. Now, I don't know about you. Personally, I'd rather sin than hack off my right hand. And I might rather sin than have you admonish me. Oh, I guess that's kind of the point, isn't it? Wow. Is it possible I'm afraid of the wrong things? Is it possible my very resistance to you admonishing me is because I'm afraid of the wrong things? Is it possible that when Jesus speaks of sin, I have chosen to disregard the seriousness of what he has to say about it? So I disregard the plea of admonishment. And Jesus says to sin is not to be clever or naughty or adventurous, but to sin is to choose slavery. It's like chaining and locking yourself to the very one who hates you, to not to be free, but to be owned. Jesus said to sin is like committing suicide. It's to choose death, not life. It's like a branch breaking itself off from the vine. Jesus says when you cause someone to sin, it would be better to have a great big rock on a chain hung around your neck and cast in the depths of the sea, because this idea of to sin is very serious. As you wrestle with these passages, you can't help but pray. You cannot help but pray this prayer. Oh God, is it possible I take my own sin and my own foolishness and my own blindness and my own arrogance way too lightly? Is it possible that I don't value enough when your Spirit's wooing me back to life? Is it possible I don't value enough your Spirit and other people calling me back to life, that I am more in love with my sin than I am with life? If that's the case, that's why we don't like admonishment very much. The reality is we're in a war. We have grown up in it. You were born in it, you will die in it. You've lived in it so long you think it's normal. It's not normal. Children should not be molested every night. Men should not walk out on wives. Wives should not be, and you can just take the list as far as you want to go. We live in the middle of a war. We are chin deep in its blood. We're not playing games. This is not a little sideline. What we're doing is significant stuff. The adversary is called a dragon. The adversary is called a lion, the serpent, the great deceiver. And he does have demons, and he does have strategies. And we stand and we fall together. And in the midst of the war, we desperately need one another. We desperately need one another. One of the sweetest moments I've ever seen in my life. It was a little snapshot, it was the morning of my son's wedding. We were in northern Missouri for my son getting married. It was about 10, 12 years ago. And my father-in-law, Julie sitting here, my wife's father, he was shot down in World War II. He was flying B-17s, flew 37 missions, and was shot down over Budapest, the oil fields. He was in a POW camp. There's a lot of stories. Sometime I'll stick them in there, but he was in what's called the 600-mile hunger walk. He weighed 85 pounds when he was liberated. He spent the winter of 1944 and the winter of 1945. No food, no winter clothing, no kitchens, only with guards, with German Shepherd dogs, sleeping in ditches in Poland and in some of the forests of Germany. He weighed 85 pounds. They put him in groups of 250 men, and they just survived. They could strip bark off tree, they stripped barks off tree. If they could find grain in a barn where they spent the night, they ate the grain and they survived. The reason I tell you this story, though, is RD did survive. And the men that with him survived. Some of them. We were in northern Missouri for a wedding, and he said, there's a town I've never been able to find, but I've heard it's in northern Missouri. He asked the people, do you know where that town is? And they said, well, yeah, it's not on a map. It doesn't exist except in old-timers' memory. But yeah, that town is right 15, 20 miles from here. RD said, there's a man I haven't seen since 1945. And he and I were in the march together. I wonder if he's alive. That morning, went over and found the man. The phone call was made to him, and an old man who was blind was sitting in his driveway waiting for a man who had been on a march with to show up. There's no way I can start to articulate that moment to you. We drove up in the car. My father-in-law got out. My father-in-law's a John Wayne kind of character. And my father-in-law's hands are shaking. And he can't find a word. And the blind old man who's also in his upper 80s is sitting there, and he stands up, and two old men come to each other. And neither one could say a word. And they held each other's arms. And both cried like babies as they shook. And then, like a couple of junior high girls, what happened to you that morning after? What took place? Where did you go? And like two young boys talking, they relived that march where they had held on to each other and where they had fed each other and lived together out of that experience. I borrow that illustration to tell you that the whole of your life you spend in the middle of that war. And the one thing you cannot be is independent. The one thing you cannot be is just me and Jesus. The one thing you must be is someone who says, I refuse to turn loose of you, because those we turn loose of die, and those we hang on to live. We take care of each other. And I beg of you, well, my flesh cries out, it's because of my own sin. Don't turn loose of me. Don't turn loose of me. Please hang on. What kind of arrogance is required to believe that the insecurity and the pride of a King Saul will not invade my mind? Don't turn loose of me. What kind of arrogance is required to believe that the lust and self-centeredness of David or Solomon won't follow me home? Don't turn loose of me. What kind of arrogance is required to believe that the pretensions and spiritual posturing of Ananias and Sapphira are no temptation to me in my house? Please don't turn loose of me. What kind of arrogance is required to believe that the favoritism and the blind spots of Peter among the Galatians is something I'm immune to as I follow Christ? No, sin comes with a fog. It always does. Sin comes with a fog. It has a disorientation. Long before its worst acts are realized, a bit of spiritual vertigo begins to set in, and the world begins to turn on us, and we begin to get a little confused. And I think I'm flying level, but my vertigo was set in, and I'm not flying level at all. Even as I savor the first thoughts of sin, it begins to confuse me and turn me around. I need you. We need one another. Please hold on to me. The divine mandate is not some kind of Dwight Schrute imperative. It is the King of all glory crying, these are my beloved children. Please don't lose any. Please don't lose any. Some of the most faithful stories I know are people who simply said, I'm not turning loose of you. I've got a friend across town who drove to Mississippi, got off work at 5 o'clock because his phone call came from the wife of an old friend of his. They had done Bible study and been in college together. And the wife said, my husband's beginning to struggle. He denies it, but something's going wrong. And I have a friend who drove to Mississippi that night. And he sat at the house till his friend came home at 2 or 3 in the morning. And the guy's going, what are you doing here? And he said, because I care enough not to lose you. And 2 old friends had to work through sin that night. And one man brought life back to another. Just before I left, many of you know I spent years across town preaching. Just before I left, a young husband and wife came in and sat, and they just wept in my office, and they were saying thank you. I was a part of a team, but they were just saying thank you. And the man is standing there, and he's going, I don't know how I almost threw my wife away. I almost threw my kids away. Now, this is a good guy. We're not talking gutter here. We're talking somebody who was a good guy, but he got so disoriented by his own sin. And his neighbor sat on his porch 3 days in a row, and the man wouldn't come home because he didn't want to be confronted. And 3 days in a row, his neighbor said, I'm not leaving till you come. And finally, he came mad and finally talked to his neighbor, and the neighbor just wept with him and said, I'm so worried about you. Your heart's getting lost. Do you know what you're throwing away? And he hung on for him for weeks. And when the fog cleared, the man wept and thanked every friend he ever had in Christ who held on to him. Gang, we are that individual somewhere in our life. Admonish one another. Hold on to one another. There are qualifiers to admonishment. I've got to point those out. There are qualifiers to giving an admonishment. Take a look at Colossians 3, verses 15 and 16. When we put it up here, it has a long passage. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Since the members of one body, you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the message or the word of Christ dwell among you richly. Next page. As you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, and the Spirit singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. That's the long passage. Let's drop a lot of it out and just keep the key words in it. Because I want you to notice the tone. If you drop them back out, here are some of the words that go with it. Peace of Christ, a qualifier. Be thankful, a qualifier. Let the message or the word of Christ dwell in you richly. That's a qualifier. With all wisdom, that's a qualifier. With gratitude in your heart, that's a qualifier. There are things that make admonishment to have substance, and there are things that steal from it. I want you to notice there's a kindness and a warmth associated with admonishment. There's no hint of distant judgmentalism in admonishment. It's a word that flows from deep love and affection. Admonishment, anybody who practices in this room, there's no drive-by rock throwing admonishment. There's no anonymous notes from a caring sister admonishment. There's no beating you up because this is really good for you admonishment. There's no permission to dominate one another and call it admonishment. There's no sanctifying the use of your controlling personality and calling it admonishment. For some of you in the room, you have a controlling personality. And you'll be tempted to take admonishment and use it as the tool to beat everybody else up. No, you're not being loving, you're being controlling. You'll have to watch that. There are qualifiers that go with admonishment. There's no arrogance, there's no superiority. There is no Donald Trump or Dwight Schrute admonishment. There's no relabeling harshness and calling it courage. All of you are in a position right now that you are in preparation. You're practicing. You're going to spend your life like soldiers at the battlefront, rescuing people. Soldiers get in shape and work on things to prepare themselves because they're going to be needed. Please do it well. Firemen get in shape, not so they can save their own life. They do something to save somebody else's. Get in shape. You're going to need. And these qualifiers are how you prepare for a life of being able to admonish well. Shepherding, that's where admonishment comes from. It's not a guard dog word. Paul's description of his own 3 years with the church he loved at Ephesus was admonishing them for 3 years. Man, if that's just harsh rebuke, that's a long 3-year ministry. Man, and we were so glad to see Paul leave. But if it's, I refuse to hang on to you, and I'm hanging on to you no matter what, it's an incredible 3 years. It's the word used in Scripture for a father who raises his children, not exasperating them, but admonishing them. I don't know that I'm a model on anything of this, but I will tell you in raising my own children and now being involved in the grandchildren, I'll use Troy as my oldest. And Troy, raising a little boy to a man is not an easy journey. Many of you are on that journey. I happen to have the proverbial woodshed because I have a workshop. I build custom furniture for a hobby. Troy and I would go out to the workshop, and I'm sure Troy dreaded that walk of death out to the workshop. But I would sit sometimes with a 6th grade boy, and sometimes with a junior high boy, and sometimes with a sophomore boy, and sometimes with a college boy, and I've sat with a married son. And I've wept, and he's wept. And I go back to the junior high days, for example, and I'm going, Troy, I love you enough. I'm not going to turn loose of you. And what's happening, and admonishment happened. Here's some things that I can tell you. It's just always true. 3 things. You have to tell the truth when you admonish. You have to hold high the dignity of someone, and you have to bring humility. If you will do those 3 things, they're the very end of Ephesians 4, verse 25, verse 29, and verse 32 of Ephesians 4. But if you will be honest, and you will hold high the dignity of someone, and if there is great humility that you bring, you can admonish. The angry man forfeits his right to admonish. The divisive man forfeits his right to admonish. The impersonal, uncaring man forfeits his right to admonish. The fool forfeits his right to admonish. Oh, I know admonishment can be abused. We all know that. But so can abandonment. Let's make 2 covenants this morning. I mean that. Let's make 2 covenants. Here's the first one. We won't abandon one another. We won't abandon one another. Many of you in this room have had fathers walk out on you. You know what it's like to be abandoned. Some of you in this room had foster parents who took you back because they thought you were too much trouble or their life was too complex, and you had foster parents who said they wanted you, but you went back in the system. Many of you in the room know that story. Many of you in this room have broken relationships with family because you're in a family that will not hold onto each other. That may have been true of those families. It can never be true of this family. I'm not turning loose of you. Admonishment's messy. It just is. It just is. You admonish, very seldom is the first word out of somebody's mouth, oh, thank you. I've been hoping someone would do this. If you're an emergency room doctor, you are cussed out continually and regularly. If you're an emergency room worker, I promise you the thing that's most shocking to you is while you're pouring your life into someone, the anger and the vile you get back is incredible. If you're a veterinarian, you're going to have bites all over you. I don't care. I'm trying to save your life, you dumb dog. What are you biting me for? Because there's confusion and pain. And people in pain don't always do logical things. I promise you, if you admonish, you're going to get accusations of being judgmental. You're going to get accusations. But somewhere along the line, you got to decide, I love people enough that a few bites aren't going to hurt me any. And the one I have to have a clear conscience before is, God, did I worship enough that I brought wisdom in how I admonish? Here's the first one. Let's not abandon each other. Here's the second one, that we are open to admonishment. The flesh will never take you there. Your flesh never cheers for admonishment. If you're open to admonishment, it's simply because the Spirit of God has led you and you've given the Spirit of God enough access that your heart begins to bend. And everybody here has to worship enough and follow the leading of the Spirit so that the very ability to be admonished gets deep. Romans 8 tells me that being led by the Spirit is putting to death the misdeeds of the body. That's what being led by the Spirit is. I remember being back in 6th grade. There were 3 guys at the back of the room that grossed me and the girls out. This was long before the grunge movement and all kinds of the punk stuff, but they were back there with safety pins, and they would start to stick them under their skin. And they would stick them and stick them and stick them until they built calluses up. And they could come up with a safety pin halfway through their finger and hold it up, and me and the girls were going, oh, yuck. But here's was always their line. Doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt. And they were right. Because when you build calluses deep enough, it doesn't hurt. The great fear of my life is I will hang in my sin long enough, it doesn't hurt. I need you. I need you. I need the Spirit of God through the Word, but I need the Spirit of God out of your life. Admonish me. Please admonish me. Because it means you didn't turn loose. It means you cared. You see, stubborn, foolish, arrogant old men, I happen to live with one, needs the fresh movement of the Spirit of God in the lives of young emerging leaders. I need you. And young leaders, young emerging leaders, you need old men who might know where the dragon hides. We need each other. The very reason Julie and I changed the trajectory of our own lives is for this thing. We prayed, we fasted, we took a lot of time. My apologies to the men at Williamson because they heard a little portion of this, but from a metaphoric stage, I started over here, and this is just metaphor. I started over here when I was an 18-year-old kid. I started in the same chairs you're in. I didn't know what I wanted to be. All I wanted to do was follow Christ. And I wanted to make a difference in the kingdom. And Julie and I both started here then. And we sort of started our journey. For over 40 years, I've gotten to be in the churches. I've got to shepherd God's people. And it's been an incredible journey. As I've sort of moved across the stage of my life, I'm over here somewhere. I don't know how far. I don't think I'm at the very end of the stage, but one doesn't know. I'm somewhere over here. I'm in the last quarter of my life, as ministry life. I understand. I'm in the fourth quarter. I know that. And we could have done a lot of things, but here's what we did decide. There's a lot of people involved in it, but here's what we have done. We decided that the one thing God had been preparing and leading us for, and the one thing he put the greatest passion in us for, was to make a U-turn and come back to this side of the stage, because there's a whole bunch of 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 35-year-olds who are just starting their journey across the stage. And if you will have us, we will walk it with you. If you will have us, we want to be the ones who tell you, this is where the dragon hides. This is where the dragon bit me last time. This is where my own blindness came. This is what I've seen in other leaders I love. If you will have us, we'll walk this with you. It's a very simple concept. We simply are putting together here at the college a life and ministry preparation center. That's all it is, life and ministry preparation. We want to give you access to one intergenerational couple whose primary job is to hang out with you. We're going to bring other people from our network. We'll bring as many people from town as we can bring. And so we have people that will help you on budgeting and finances, and we'll have people who will work with you all kinds of ways. But if you want to hang out with an intergenerational old couple, that's what we're here for. You see, truth is, it's a single point. We desperately need one another. Please, do not turn loose of each other. May God bless you. May he bless you richly. You are dismissed.